We often think of wars as being between massive fleets and grand armies. Hell, for centuries, war has been exclusively a thing humans wage on other species, not each other. This place, it was different. It really was a war where everyone was on their own side. Human on human, wholesale slaughter. It's weird seeing this place so empty now. I remember alternating from running protection rackets to selling Widow when this place was at its peak. Part of me wishes we could go back, be there forever. The excitement was addicting, really. Now I just hope someday we can recapture what we had here, in Jumptown. Paul Shelley, Jumptown Wars veteran, February 2950.
The Jumptown Wars were fought in a dozen places. From the cold surface of Yella to its orbital ring. From Grim Hex to Cry-Astra refueling. More than 10,000 humans fought in it, and thousands of them died in it. Transport ships became drug runners, and fighters became enforcers. Huge fleets of human ships blotted out the skies, leaving human wreckage in their wake. Humans slaughtered one another wholesale here in human space, beside places with old human names. More people died than any previous conflict in Stanton. Whole fleets were reduced to ash in mere minutes. Men and women who had never committed a parking violation now found themselves drug smugglers in great convoys, fighting epic battles over a moon most of them had only heard about before. They were making history, and for many, it was one of the greatest adventures of their lives. The war would make some rich, ruin others, and change the lives of all who lived through it.
I find that living in the heavens suits me. Kelly Kaplan, CEO, Crusader Industries.
Like the many wars before it, the origins of the Jumptown Wars stretch back far beyond the first shots fired. First discovered in 2851, the Stanton System was always a special case. It was the only system to have multiple super-Earth-sized planets, and each and every one of them within the habitable zone. Stanton had 2 bidirectional large jump points connecting to Terra and Magnus. This meant Stanton was a new hub for faster trade between the major economic centers of Sol and Terra. The only issue was, when the system was first discovered by the UEE, they weren't the first humans there. Smugglers, settlers, and prospectors had already started to settle when the first UEE military forces arrived. Unfortunately for the first settlers, the system was too much of a prize for the military to allow them to remain. Declaring eminent domain on the system, the Navy brought in the most powerful ship in the fleet, a Bengal-class supercarrier, to enforce their will. Over the following years, the UEE Navy would systematically hunt down and remove every one of the squatters. Facing the might of the military, these settlers never stood a chance. By the late 29th century, the system was firmly in the hands of the UEE, who began terraforming the planets for human habitation. The Navy even built a lattice of platforms to float in the upper atmosphere of the partially terraformed gas giant Stanton II, to act as a shipyard and base. With the system firmly in their control, the government now found themselves in a quandary. What to do with it? The empire was still in an economic slump, caused in the aftermath of the Messer dynasty. It was also in the middle of a century-long drought of colonial ambitions. There wasn't much hope to entice enough new settlers to colonize these verdant worlds, and keeping an active military presence to keep control of the system was getting expensive. Yet, they couldn't give up the economic and strategic system. What they needed was a way out, one that would come from an unorthodox place.
I am sick of people questioning our right to operate in this world. What is a corporation but the extension of the people? A government is elected through votes, while we have been elected by your credits.
Colonel Gavin E. Hurston.
With the fall of the Messers, many older companies tied to them fell as well. This left a vacuum which a few companies managed to fill. One of these was the long-standing megacorp conglomerate ArcCorp. Its latest claim to fame was its line of fusion engines, built by a struggling engine manufacturer, Novalite, who they acquired in 2811. Their engines had quickly become the standard, which all others are judged by. The issue they were encountering was the requirements to make their engines. There was so much demand that they couldn't keep up with the orders, and there just wasn't enough space for them to operate their factories efficiently. When word came that the UEE was struggling with Stanton, ArcCorp approached them with an offer. The company wanted to buy a continent on one of the worlds to serve as one massive factory. This demand was unheard of before, and many in the Senate were wary of giving one company so much land. Others, however, saw this as an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone. Given the unique nature of the request and the unique nature of the system, some senators proposed a more ambitious plan. They wanted to sell an entire planet of the Stanton System to ArcCorp. ArcCorp agreed, and after vigorous debate in the Senate, a vote was passed allowing the sale of all the planets in the system. The government had some caveats to these sales. The system would never get representation in the Senate, fearing that any representative from the system would speak to the interest of the corporations and not the people. All UEE common laws were to be enforced and followed by the corporations on the planets and orbital bodies of the planets. Local jurisdictions fell to the companies themselves to enforce as they pleased. ArcCorp agreed to the terms and asked for the third planet in the system. The Senate quietly sent out offers to bid on the remaining planets. Hurston Dynamics had interest in the first planet, as it was the hottest and most desolate of the four. They were in need of more space to not only build but test their weapons. Microtech showed interest in the fourth planet in the system. An accident during terraforming had caused the planet to be habitable but much colder than was expected. They saw the natural cold as a benefit for their supercomputers, requiring less energy to keep them at optimal temperature. Crusader Industries, the newest of the corporations approached, also had an interest in buying the gas giant of Stanton II. Originally, Crusader was offered a buy one get one free option due to the lack of land on and around the planet, but turned it down. Their goal was to convert the old base into a headquarters and shipyard to build their large transports more efficiently. The planets were given the names of their companies as their official titles, with Stanton II becoming known as Crusader. Crusader Industries CEO, Kelly Kaplan, named the moons after the main characters of a popular 24th century morality tale called A Gift for Baba. The story followed three siblings as they made their way from Mars to Jupiter's moon Europa. They were traveling to give the perfect gift to their grandmother Baba. The moon that was covered in over 100 volcanoes was named after Selen, who was the most angry of the children. The dusty red moon, with an almost perfect orbit around the gas giant, was named Daymar, after the child who was most easily lost in the story. The cold moon, covered in a water ice crust, was named Yella, after the oldest of the siblings who was said to be cool and calculating. Little did anyone know that the cool world would soon become home to the cold and calculating realities of war. During the early years of the UEE's control over Stanton, many prospectors made their way into the system with the government's blessing. The ring around Stanton II's icy moon was especially valuable. So much so that Green Imperial built a housing exchange, or HEX station, inside one of the larger asteroids. This was meant to be a temporary structure, offering a bed and some basic services to those lone prospectors around Yella. As the system developed with its new owners, it quickly became a mecca for industry from all over the Empire. Scientists, entrepreneurs, mercenaries, traders, and haulers all flocked to the system to take advantage of the burgeoning trade. New outposts were built all over the system, including the moons of Crusader. They range from mining operations to research labs and even family farms. This economic boom attracted other unsavory types to seek their fortune as well. Pirates, outlaws, smugglers, and other criminals snuck their way into the system, raiding and picking off vulnerable transports, leeching off the success of these new lands and the lack of formal protection from the UEE. Because of the dangers and the stiff competition from larger groups, many of the entrepreneurs and independent outposts and stations of the Stanton System were abandoned, left to the elements. Green Imperial's Hex Station was no exception. As the valuable materials of Yella's ring were mined out, fewer and fewer people called the station home. Finally, Green Imperial would officially close the station in 2938. The former mining hab would not remain closed for long. New gangs like the Nine Tails, Nova Riders, and countless other syndicates and outlaws took up residence and used the abandoned station as a lucrative base of operations. Many of the abandoned outposts also found themselves repurposed to be dead drops for smugglers or rally points for pirates. One in particular, a former research lab in the southern hemisphere, nestled inside a crater against a large mountain, quietly opened up in 2948. The locals would come to call it Jumptown.
While the level of crime here is typically no higher than many places in the Empire, visitors should be cautious travelling to more remote areas, such as the asteroid belt around the moon Yella, since outlaw attacks have been known to occur.
Humanity has always found unique and creative means to reach altered states of reality. Since the dawn of civilization, we have been attempting to numb our senses, escape reality, or free our minds with numerous substances. Widow is the street name for an ink-black synthetic opioid that is injected as a liquid. It is often used as a sedative, relaxing the users. Extensive use of the drug stains the user's veins black, creating subcutaneous patterns throughout the body, reminiscent of spider webs. It is a Class A controlled substance in the UEE, with fines up to 10,000 UEC if caught trafficking, and up to 4,000 for possession. Despite this, it is still a very popular recreational drug. Everyone from the poor to rich engage with it. It is also not too difficult to manufacture, requiring minimal tools and ingredients readily available, making it very easy to obtain. When Jumptown began operations in early 2948, its premier product was Widow. At first, sales were moderate. Many criminals in the system found themselves turning a good profit by buying from Jumptown and selling the drug all over the system. As word got around, more and more people would flock to the outpost, from hardened crooks to part-time smugglers. Still, only a minority of the population knew about Jumptown, let alone the profits to be made selling Widow. There were occasional conflicts, but it was always localized, little more than the normal conflicts between rival gangs. None of them knew that an economic shift in metals would turn their small businesses into vast empires, and the small skirmishes into a full-blown drug war.
Well, I mean, in the beginning, as a legitimate hauler, it was the best thing that could happen. All of the pirates that had plagued the system before were tied up, and competition for outpost trading was tied up since everyone wanted to do the Jumptown run. Then the pirates started attacking the Crusader Cryastros. It got dangerous enough that I joined a large PMC. I figured there'd be safety in numbers. Ammon Grask, November 22nd, 2948.
At the end of 2948, an economic recession swept over the Stanton System. The local traders, whose livelihoods depended on cross-system trade, were seeing less and less profits. Some had none at all. In desperation, many sought out new trade routes. At first, only a few of them had ever heard of Widow. Even fewer knew about Jumptown. While guides had always existed to find the off-the-beaten-path outpost, in November of 2948, users on Spectrum began to post directions and coordinates to the drug lab. This set off an explosion of interest in the site and its lucrative trade. Like always, when there is an opportunity for profit, there are those willing to capitalize on others' hopes. Mercenary companies started to offer protection for those ill-equipped haulers, while pirates saw this as a perfect chance to make a quick buck. In the ensuing months, Jumptown would become a household name in the system, infamous for the lucrative business and unbridled barbarity that went on there. People from all walks of life were making their way towards Yella to try and capitalize on the new market. One of them was an independent pilot named Chugdatarn. He would later document his one and only experience at Jumptown for posterity on Spectrum.
As many contracts at the time weren't exceptionally lucrative, I figured I'd start up my Avenger Titan and head there for a piece of the action. Entering through the front door, I discovered that half a dozen people were there before me. Unbeknownst to me, they were taking turns purchasing Widow. At the time, I was oblivious to the fact that commodities were in limited supply, so I'd cut to the front of the line. At the terminal, I spent every last bit of AUEC I had filling my cargo bay. In hindsight, another unwise decision. It wasn't until I had taken off and began to pick up speed that I glanced down at the comms. Someone identified me by name and announced a standing kill order on me. My afterburners had never ignited faster.
The flood of activity picked up as 2948 came to a close. With the arrival of military surplus Aegis Hammerhead corvettes, the battle for the skies of Yella was increasing. These ships were perfect for one of the most successful ways to make money, and it wasn't off the drug itself. Groups would take over the lab and charge an entry fee. This extortion was known as toll boothing. A pilot going by the name Devil Dog Hogg wrote down his experiences dealing with such a toll booth during the war.
After jumping to Yella, I went to the rendezvous to meet up with the rest of the formation. We had about 5 birds of various types that the guys brought. I mean, we're all private contractors, so it was whatever's in the hangar, you know? One guy had a Gladius, another had a Hornet. I think I remember seeing a Saber in there, too. Once we formed up, we all set towards JT to scare off this toll booth. The flight lead squawked over the global comms.
Hey, whoever's squatting JT, beat it.
His reply was pretty short.
Make me.
We all made sure we were ready for a fight and started to put our game face on. At about 15K out from Jumptown, he showed up on the radar, and it looked like he had buried himself into the crater. That told me he had a turret, and was probably operating as an AA platform. I started to search for a missile lock to blast him out of the hole that he crawled into, when our lead ship came over the comms.
Oh shit, it's a hammerhead.
I guess that explains why he was so successful as a toll booth. At 5K out, we started to receive fire and dropped to the deck so the rim of the crater would obscure his line of sight. As we crested over the rim, I could see he had wedged himself into the far side of the crater opposite of the JT complex. I barely had enough time to lock with missiles and squeeze them off before I got lit up. I banged hard and started to evade. Those size 5s tore through the Penguin's hull like it was made of paper. Systems were going critical all over and failing before I even reached the other side of the crater. That shark was ripping me to shreds, so I did the only thing I could, and I punched it out before it was too late.
Many tried to find counters to the new threat, but the shields of the former military ship proved too tough for conventional means. Some turned to the new 2948 Origin Jumpworks 600i, whose collective firepower was just enough to bring down the Aegis juggernaut. Still others found a more novel approach. With the release of the new Anvil Aerospace Aero fighter, a solution was found to deal with the hammerheads. With the shields off, the ship could mount 3 Hurston Dynamics attrition laser cannons. The attrition line of weapons is unique, as the heat buildup of the weapon would translate to more damage, meaning the more you hit your target, the higher damage each shot would give. It effectively could bring down a hammerhead entirely solo. This configuration of the Arrow became a favorite of a pilot named Fractal, who posted video clips of his time during the conflict. He called himself the Jumptown Landlord and was infamous for toll boothing. He is responsible for at least 15 confirmed kills during the conflict, and his records are the best documentation of this configuration used during the war. Not all fought in the skies of Yella. The crater around the outpost became a killing field as pirates and mercenaries alike felt their best bet was to control the lab directly. One such operation was called Project Nomad, led by the members of the Immobile Infantry Mercenary Corporation. The aim was to lock down the drug lab under the guise of anonymity. Purchasing several specialty armor sets, the mercenaries dressed up like the nomads of Lear 3 and held Jumptown for several hours. Their footage showed how effective their methods were. With their team armed with Apocalypse Arms Scourge shoulder-mounted railguns, they were able to destroy or fend off any who attempted to land. The Scourge was used very effectively during the war by those on the ground. One pilot who used it to great effect, going by the handle Buster the Destroyer, talked about her time in Jumptown fondly. Her experience was typical of most who came to Jumptown.
My favorite thing to do was to take a stolen ship down, land it as bait, and position myself on foot under the drug lab itself, equipped with a good old Apocalypse Arms Scourge railgun. Nothing was more fun than to watch someone come shoot down my stolen ride and then thrust around the area in absolute confusion, assuming they were being fired upon by another ship in the area. The Jumptown Wars, they weren't about preventing or aiding drug trade. They were about chaos and the hunt itself. To hell with law and order. Sometimes you just wanted to shoot those foolish enough to ask across comms, "JT safe?"
Not everyone came to Jumptown for profit. Some came to observe the carnage up close. Diabolus, a filmmaker famous for his time-lapse work, stayed on the edge of the crater for 24 hours to record the coming and going of the various ships, a snapshot in the day at Jumptown. Most of these witnesses were seeking to make a record of the event, or at least have their own stories of a moment in time many were already coming to realize would be recorded in history books. One such bystander, Buzzard, wrote about an experience he had while overlooking the drug lab.
Dawn was breaking, and I crawled to a position where I could watch the Jumptown hab itself. To no one's surprise, it was a violent affair. I watched 2 Connies on the ground get vaporized by a marauding wildfire hornet, and that was just the beginning of a long day of aerial combat directly overhead. Dozens of ships came and went. Some were successful in getting Widow and escaping with their cargo. Others were not so lucky. Many laying scattered all around the crater turned into nothing more than wreckage. And then a hammerhead appeared out of nowhere and started just laying waste to anyone who dared approach. In the middle of all this, a freelancer attempted a landing. When the hammerhead opened fire, the pilot just turned and engaged it head-on. It was unbelievable. A battle of guts, determination, and pure firepower. They moved out of sight, and I don't know what happened to the hammerhead, but after 5 minutes, the freelancer came back, landed, picked up a load, and left like it was nothing. I don't know who that pilot was, but I always wanted to tell their story.
A hammerhead and about 6 or 7 fighter escorts were holding Jumptown hostage. If anyone wanted to reap its rewards, they had to pay a price. Soon, on Global Chat, everyone found out this group of guys decided to down a Connie after he had paid their price. Turns out it was into a he said, she said type of argument, where the freighter pilot was accused of opening fire on them first, which made no sense if he just paid 10,000 Alpha UEC. We weren't fooled. We mobilised. There may be, 20 of us in this ragtag group of vigilantes. We attacked, and we had our asses handed to us. Davis 1891, February 2949.
As the war dragged on, not all felt it was good for the system. Many began to vocally demand that Crusader security do something as the months-long conflict was spiraling out of control. Militias were formed to clean up the area, hunting down pirates and freighters with equal vigor. The feel of the conflict was changing. Gone were the heady days of independent haulers making more credits in one run than they had the entire year before. Groups were becoming organized, tolling more common. By March, you were as likely to be attacked by vigilantes as you were by pirates. The lines were becoming blurred. The tide was changing, and everyone could feel it. This sentiment was very present in the account of Shio Gorath, who wrote about his time in Jumptown with bittersweet memories.
As time went on, protection rackets grew, the trader-on-trader hostilities lessened. Everyone had lost their fair share of ships and cargo, and, we were all starting to resent the multi-crew gangs more than we feared a single craft trader. A quick JT clear was a common broadcast back then. What response you got would dictate whether you could make any money that session. Usually overconfident hitmen and glaives would try to demand ransoms, but there was never a king of JT for long. Anyone who sat above JT was sitting under the sword of Damocles. Well, all of this was for a mostly unmarked, seemingly unimportant shack out in the middle of nowhere.
Crusader Industries remains the most charitable company in UEE space, and the good they have enabled across the Empire is undeniable. However, some critics question Crusader's methods, suggesting instead they allocate these funds towards tighter security measures. One expert even referred to Crusader's rising security costs as the biggest financial threat to the future of the company.
There was a rising call for the government to step in and deal with rampant violence around the drug lab. Independent haulers who didn't participate were growing tired of the rise in criminal elements in the system. Those who had transitioned from lawful pursuits were finding it frustrating, as many lost their entire savings in runs that were met with disaster. Many turned to the UEE to step in and stop the conflict. Because of the nature of the system, however, this proved difficult. In the middle of the conflict, the UEE Senate had convened a meeting with Crusader Industries CEO, Kelly Kaplan. The Senate had concerns that the system was out of control of the corporations who were charged with its protection. Crime was on the rise, though no one in Seoul knew why. Crusader had been caught giving false data about the rising crime to the UEE advocacy at the start of the Jumptown conflict, which had the company in hot water with the government. Ms. Kaplan was there to discuss how they were dealing with the rise in crime. She also unveiled a program called Crusader Cares, a watchdog program that was used to help clean up the system and gather more data. The CEO explained that their crime rates were on par with the rest of the system. Just when the committee was to vote on closing their investigations, one senator, Kilos Albervar, a transitionalist from Terra, challenged the validity of the numbers.
Senator Albervar, you may proceed.
Thank you, Chairperson Escher. Mrs. Kaplan, what can you tell me about Jumptown?
I'm sorry, Senator. Could you repeat the question?
This report appears to claim that Crusader has become better at tracking crime within its sovereign space. Yet, my staff on Seoul were able to uncover repeated criminal activity at a location known colloquially as Jumptown on the Crusader-controlled moon of Yella. My question is, are you familiar with the location and why has nothing been done about the criminal activity there?
Chairperson Escher, I'd like to request a 5-minute recess to use the facilities. Could I also get a refill on my water? As you can see, I've drank all of it already.
Granted. Everyone, consider this a tight 5. Once we're back, we'll proceed with Senator Albervar's questions.
When they returned, the truth came out. The 5-month-long conflict for the drug lab, the rise in smuggling, and the numerous reports of violence on and over the surface of the moon. Crusader reiterated its desire to improve the system and to work with the advocacy to deal with the issue. In March of 2949, Jumptown was changed forever. An economic uptick in the system meant more and more haulers were returning to their legitimate business routes. Fearing the reprisals by the Senate, Crusader Security issued new patrols to intercept and scan ships more frequently. The final death blow was the opening of rival labs around Hurston and ArcCorp. The traffic to Jumptown slowed, then stopped almost altogether. A few remained to eke out a living with the drug. The heyday of the conflicts for Jumptown had passed. While it did not have the epic scope of the Tavaran Wars or the visceral threat of the Vandul War, the Jumptown War was uniquely human. Not only was it human against human, but it was fought for some of the oldest and most profound human reasons: desire, greed, sympathy, and hubris. For that reason alone, the Jumptown Wars should be remembered, for it brought out the best and worst in humanity. These stories are true accounts taken from the people who were there, the veterans of the conflict, now presented as a living record of the event. While no one knows what is in store for Jumptown, one fact remains undeniable. It has made a significant impact in the lives of those who lived through the Jumptown Wars.